미국 영어하고 영국 영어가 좀 다릅니다. 우리 한국 사람들은 미국 영어에 익숙해 있지만 대부분의 유럽은 영국식 영어를 씁니다. 특히 영어를 쓰지 않는 나라가 자기 나라 말과 영국 발음이 녹아 들어갔을 때에는 우리가 듣기 참 어렵습니다. 그래서 귀를 쫑긋 세워서 잘 들으셔야 됩니다. Let's start. Hello, I'm poet Kiron Lee, who hosted a special discussion with overseas writers at the Hangul Writers Competition. The theme of this talk is the Nobel Prize for Literature in various languages. More than 6,000 languages are now spoken around the world. Among them, it is reported about 600 languages have letters. In languages with written text, various forms of the literatures are represented depending on the countries of use. Literary awards are given according to their literary achievement. The Nobel Prize for Literature is one of them. The Nobel Prize for Literature is not a metaphor for determining the essence of literature. However, the position of the Nobel Prize in Literature among the awards given around the world is unique. This discussion aimed to share opinions on the relationship between literatures published in manuscript use in the world today and the Nobel Prize in Literature. Before the discussion, let me first introduce the president of international PEN from each country who participate in this non-face-to-face video conference. Regula Venske, Germany PEN. Helmuth A, Niderlehe르미스 A, Austria PEN. Ladislav Volko, Slovakia PEN. Magda Carneci, Rumania PEN. Degenaar, Netherlands PEN. Jean-Frederic Brun, French PEN. The president of each PEN center who invited in this conference are the live in Europe. However, their spoken languages are non-mainstream languages. They are not English, French, and Spanish. We will discuss this topic in relatively same position as Korea. By the way, first of all, President Regula Venske, please introduce yourself to the Korean PEN member.
Hello from Hamburg, Germany. My name is Regula Venske. I'm a scholar of literature and a writer. I've been a member of German PEN since 1998. I served as General Secretary from 2013 to 2017 and was elected President of German PEN in May 2017. And let me add, I cherish fond memories of the Congress Writers Writing in Korean, organized by the PEN International Korean chapter in September 2015 in Gyeongju. Thank you again for inviting me. And thank you also for the invitation to participate in this digital Congress. It's wonderful that even during these hard times of a worldwide pandemic, modern technology enables people from all over the world to communicate and exchange ideas. I'm very grateful for that.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the Nobel Prize for Literature.
The Nobel Prize, which was established under the terms of the will of the engineer Alfred Nobel and named after him, has had a twofold image from the beginning. In the statutes, it says about the Nobel Prize for Literature that that person should receive it who shall have produced in the field of literature the most outstanding work in an ideal direction. But what exactly is meant by this ideal direction? Who determines? And did Alfred Nobel himself serve humanity in an ideal direction when he invented dynamite? One might well argue that he has served humanity more by investing the Nobel Prizes. But this dates back to 1900, and while at his time this was a noble vision, more than 100 years later we see the restrictions and hindrances that go along with it more clearly. Nobel's vision was a Eurocentric one, which would include the United States. Coming from a rich family, his father owned an arms factory, he received an excellent education and at the age of 17 already mastered 5 languages, namely Swedish, German, French, English, and Russian. The countries he visited as a young man were Sweden, Germany, France, and the United States. While this was much more than an average person of his time could ever imagine, it still reveals what we nowadays would call a Eurocentric, Western-oriented frame of mind. In the history of the Nobel Prize, some continents have been neglected shamefully. If the Nobel Prize wants to continue to be considered a high-ranking prize in the 21st century, this has got to change.
Many international PEN members have received the Nobel Prize in the literature, but I think most of the winners were Western Europe centers. Some continents, including Asia, were almost ignored. I'd like to hear your opinion on this point.
100 years ago, at the founding dinner of PEN International, our first president, John Galsworthy, proclaimed, "We writers are some sort of trustees for human nature. If we are narrow and prejudiced, we harm the human race." Burhan Zemnes, our newly elected president, quoted these words in his acceptance speech and thus reaffirmed 100 years later his founding commitment of our noble organization. Quite a number of Nobel laureates were PEN names, among whom are John Galsworthy himself, as well as Heinrich Böll, Hule Soyinka, Toni Morrison, Günter Grass, Orhan Pamuk, and Svetlana Alexievich, to name but a few. I have difficulties in calling them mainstream. They were all outstanding one way or the other. On the contrary, I've been more critical of other names who won the Nobel Prize, some of whom are even no longer remembered.
Thank you for your words, Regula Venske. And next, Helmuth A. Please introduce yourself to the Korean PEN members.
My name is Helmuth A. Niderleheremiss, and I'm president of PEN Austria. I'm writing prose and poetry. I'm a translator from English into German. I'm an editor and the founder of 2 series of books, the edition PEN. We published around 200 titles. And now a new series called Lenguas de Tierra. There are 5 titles only. This new series started in September 21. Both series are open for literature from all parts of the world, and literature from Korea is highly welcome.
Thank you. And I would like to hear your thoughts on the Nobel Prize for the literature.
There's always something unjust about the award of literary prizes. The decision, is a great novel award-worthy, then a collection of poems cannot be made at all. Are storytellers more important than poets? This ultimately insoluble question must also be asked about the Nobel Prize. Last year, the American poet Louise Glück received the award. She was rather unknown in the German-speaking world. None of their works, their translated books, have been available. And now, after a year, she is almost unknown again. The quality of their work is irrelevant in reception. Every literature lover could probably have named the different candidates who is perceived as more important artistically, more valuable in the country of the reader. The Nobel Prize is therefore often perceived as a big raffle that is as unfair as gambling is. Winston Churchill was honored and Graham Greene was not. The difference in the quality of their writing can't be seriously debated. Churchill was politically more powerful, but this should not be seen as a feature for the Nobel Prize. I'm firmly convinced not at all.
Thank you for your words. And next, Ladislav Volko, please introduce yourself to the Korean PEN members.
My name is Ladislav Volko. I'm a member of the CzechPENcen터 and its former president. I write poetry, essays, and journalism, in Slovak and Polish. In addition to Slovakia and Poland, my work has been published in Czech Republic, India, where I served as Slovak ambassador, the USA, Korea, and Germany. I have published or contributed to several publications in the fields of film, media, literature, culture in general, and of course poetry. I live in Bratislava, Slovakia.
Thank you. And I would like to hear your thoughts on the Nobel Prize for Literature.
In general, literary awards are a pleasant enrichment of the work of particular writer, but somehow they do not affect the direction of literature in particular. At the same time, it's good that they exist, because sometimes they help to draw attention to the work of the author, the country and culture from which this came. If they are financially subsidized, it is important for writers, because usually writers are not very rich, and help them improve their financial situation. The bearers have social prestige. They are often translated into languages they did not before even know existed. At the same time, they draw society's attention to the importance of literature as a whole.
Thank you for your word. And next, President Magda Carneci, please introduce yourself to the Korean pen members.
Hello, my name is Magda Carneci. I'm a writer of Romanian origin. I used to be the director of the Romanian Cultural Center in Paris in the 2000s. I was president of the Romanian Pen Club in the 2010. And now I'm a freelance writer and an art critic, and I am the editor-in-chief of an art magazine in Bucharest.
Welcome to Carneci. And next, Job Digner, please introduce yourself to the Korean pen members. And also, I would like to hear your thoughts on the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Dear colleagues, my name is Job Degenaar. I'm a poet and chairman of Pen Emergency Fund. I thank Korean Pen for the honorable invitation to say a few words about the Nobel Prize for Literature on this 9th World Korean Writers' Contest. Since 1895, the Swedish Nobel Prize is given annually to someone with exceptional achievements in the field of science. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Nobel Prize for Peace and Literature were also added. From the beginning, the prize was cosmopolitan and independent from all nationalities. Nobel wrote in his will, "We should not give consideration to the nationality of the candidates." I think that's a wonderful, universal, unifying idea. For the prizes for science and for peace, everyone has an equal chance of receiving this highly respected prize. The same should apply to the prize for literature, but language is a serious handicap. Almost all laureates used an originally European language, and from the exceptional writers who came from other parts of the world, good English translations of their books were available at that time. The European languages are overrepresented, and I don't think that is deliberately. You cannot expect the Academy is able to read all the world's languages, but a broader view through good translations should do more justice to everyone. Authoritative literary institutes in the world, including pen centers, may nominate authors as candidates. And winners from earlier years may also nominate someone. If such a previous winner is a European, there's a big chance that he will nominate another European. This Eurocentrism, including languages bordering those of Europe, such as Russian, arises, to my point of view, because the Nobel Prize and the awarding committee themselves are traditionally European, and because European important literary scholars in general, in addition to their own language, understand English and sometimes also French, German and Spanish, but almost never Korean, Burmese, Tigrinya or Chinese. It's a fact that character languages, main Indian languages like Hindi, Marathi and Manipur, mixtures of alphabetic and syllabic scripts like Burmese, Korean and the countless African languages are missing. The lack of knowledge of and appreciation for a different culture, such as Asian and African cultures, might be an obstacle too. Literature should know no frontiers. But if someone writes in a language that is not widely understood, then there's a problem, also in Europe itself. My own language, Dutch, has never had prize winners in spite of 2 nominations. How can this be changed? Good and well distributed translations could make sure that the extraordinary literary quality of an author could also be noticed in other countries and cultures. Nevertheless, I would prefer a broader view of other cultures by the Nobel Prize Committee. Why not a Nobel Prize in Literature for the Korean Lee Sang-ne or Lee Hot-sae? Why not a second prize, a Nobel Prize for non-mainstream languages, equal to the mainstream Nobel Prize? Swedish librarians tried to create something similar in 2018 based on a public poll. They awarded an alternative Nobel Prize to a French writer from Guadeloupe. However, this prize didn't have the status of the original Nobel Prize. The world is bigger than the world of the Swedish Academy that awards the prizes for literature. Korean is also spoken by more than 50 million people. Good translations of the best Korean literature and its wide distribution in, for example, English, could bring the award one step closer.
Thank you for your words. And next, Jean-Frederic Brun. Please introduce yourself to the Korean PEN members.
I'm Jean-Frederic Brun, the president of the CompetPENcenter. My language, Occitan, is the historical language of all the south of France and also some little parts of Italy and Spain. It belongs to the family of Romanic languages. It has been written since the 10th century and has given birth to an important literature with thousands of writers and literary works. It played an important role in the history of European literatures during the Middle Age, but then French became more and more the only language of the Kingdom of France, and other cultures were progressively erased. However, we have been so lucky to obtain a Nobel Prize in 1904, given to our great poet Frédéric Mistral. To introduce more precisely myself, I can say that I have been the author of a dozen of books of poetry and narrative that provide a clear demonstration with the works of other Occitan writers that our language is not dead and wants to continue to enchant our life during the next millennium.
I would like to hear your thoughts on the Nobel Prize for Literature.
It is sure first that the Nobel Prize is the most famous literary prize, and therefore, if one wants to have a comprehensive picture of the literature over the 20th century, he can, of course, read the works of the awardees of this prize. But it's sure also that many major authors of the 20th centuries have not been given this award. For example, Jorge Luis Borges, Graham Greene, Rainer Maria Rilke, Federico García Lorca, Italo Calvino, Franz Kafka, Fernando Pessoa, Constantin Cavafy, Osip Mandelstam, for several reasons. Sometimes this meant that they died too early, and at the time they died, they were not known enough over the world. And other times, it is that they were, on the opposite, very famous authors, and everybody was expecting that they would be awarded, and thus the Nobel Prize was given to less known authors, which were not expected. Also, other authors like Ezra Pound, the famous American poet, were ruled out on the basis of their political opinion. Most of the time, the committee did not select the famous great author that everybody was expecting, but they awarded other people that were less known. Therefore, they put a great light over their name. For example, Odysseus Elitis, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Greg Walcott. It's clear that at the beginning, the selection was based on European appreciation standards, and thus only writers in European languages were selected over the first 50 years. There is a special case of Rabindranath Tagore, the famous Indian poet. Actually, Tagore's works were appreciated according to the English translation, which was the work of the author, even if he primarily illustrated the Bengali language. It is also clear that this preeminence of European culture has then more and more been criticized, and that the philosophy of the prize has changed in the second middle of the 20th century. To some extent, it became more open to the other parts of the world. There is a famous example with the award given to Miguel Ángel Asturias in 1967. This prize was given to this author, who actually was writing in Spanish, but mainly Miguel Ángel Asturias powerfully expresses Native American culture. Just after him, in 1968, there was a prize given to a Japanese writer, Yasunari Kawabata, which further illustrated this will to celebrate with the Nobel Prize non-European cultures. Actually, at this time, over more than 110 awarded writers, there are only 8 writers writing in languages other than the European ones, which are primarily English, but also French, Scandinavian, German, Russian, Spanish. And similarly, there have been only 9 women given the prize during the 20th century. That means 9% of the awardees. But since the beginning of this century, there are 7 women. That means that they are 35%. That represents an increase in the number of female authors who are awarded. Actually, the process of selection used by the Swedish Academy helps to understand the paradoxical choices that are regularly pointed out. We know that the Academy receives a lot of proposals, around 350 every year, and then they make a selection, and they finally have to select among 5 candidates. And it would be interesting to know this list of potential Nobel Prizes, because this probably will provide a more precise and better view of the best international literature over the last 150 years. The choice that is finally done is clearly a political choice. Most of the time, this choice seems to be influenced by a recent international news. In fact, one can say that the Nobel Prize is undoubtedly a literary one, primarily based on the aesthetic and literary value of the awarded works, but that it also aims at emphasizing through a writer the values of human rights and respect among people. In other terms, beside the Nobel Prize for Peace, the Nobel Prize for Literature is also a prize aiming at promoting pacification of international relationships. This is clearly one of its goals since the beginning, and this is fully in line with Alfred Nobel's own project. Nevertheless, one could reasonably say that the Nobel Prize has effectively celebrated more than 50 major voices of our times, even if some other choices can be questionable, and if, of course, dozens of authors of major importance have not been awarded.
Considering the aspect of the winners, such as Arnold Solzhenitsyn, Herta Miller, writers who denounced the evil of war and those who denounced the human rights in communist countries are the mainstreams. Helmuth Niderleherbst, what do you think about this point?
In the times when the Iron Curtain divided Europe, political commitment was a decisive advantage in order to win the Nobel Prize. The West could morally raise its index finger. It was clear that moral considerations were always to the disadvantage of the dominance of the Communist Party in the Eastern Bloc. And this is still today. The Eastern Bloc was a grateful object to feel like something better. Some of the mistakes made by dissidents were willingly ignored. Solzhenitsyn's anti-Semitism was ignored in consideration. The meticulous portrayal of the Gulag is outstanding in the work of this Russian author. This alone would be worthy of the Nobel Prize.
For your word. And next, Job Degenaar. What do you think at that point?
When awarding the prize, there's another aspect, politically correct behavior. The Nobel Prize in Literature will be given to an author who, in the words of Alfred Nobel, has written the most remarkable work with an idealistic trend. A writer must reject war and stand up for human rights in countries with a totalitarian system. This non-literary aspect has led to much debate. Famous writers such as Leo Tolstoy and Henrik Ibsen were not awarded the prize because the work was not idealistic enough. Later they used this aspect more freely. However, sometimes the Academy's choice is controversial, especially by writers who have a politically reprehensible attitude, or when they are unknown or avant-garde, or when he is called Bob Dylan. An organization like PEN is a very good companion for the Swedish Academy by judging the aspect of politically correct behavior. The main goals of PEN are, as you know, defending the right to freedom of expression, promoting literature, and the free transport of all literature. But the Charter for PEN also says mutual respect and a good understanding between all people can realize the ideal of one humanity living in peace and equality in one world. This is, I suppose, the main goal for PEN.
Thank you for your words, Job Degenaar. And next, Jean-Frederic Brun. What do you think at that point?
The issue of the political relevance of the Nobel Prize clearly appears when we look at the Russian awardees. In 1933, the committee decided not to give the prize to Maxim Gorky, who was, of course, an outstanding Russian writer, but who was too close to Stalin, and the committee awarded Ivan Bunin, a Russian immigrated to France and who had lost his Russian nationality. In 1958, the prize was given to Boris Pasternak, and in 1970 to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Of course, in both cases, outstanding writers have been selected, but also it's clear that both prizes were also strong political signals for international opinions, since both writers provided in their books a powerful picture of life in USSR. And these books clearly showed that life in USSR was very, very different from what the communist propaganda was repeating all over the world. And these two great authors became universal symbols of what was life under Soviet communism. This generated a great debate on opinion, and had probably an important geopolitical relevance. Actually, authors like Pablo Neruda in 1971, Jean-Paul Sartre in 1964, Gabriel García Márquez in 1982 were also awarded, although they were overtly close to communism. And similarly, in 2012, the prize was given to the Chinese writer Mo Yan, and this prize was criticized because people say that this author was supposed to be very close to the Chinese government, and even more, he said absolutely nothing about the violation of human rights in China. Other examples of choices more or less driven by political concerns are, for example, the prize given to Harold Pinter in 2005. Pinter had vehemently criticized American military intervention in Iraq, and also the prize given to the famous Turkish writer Orhan Pamuk in 2006, after Orhan Pamuk publicly recognized the Armenian genocide and the massacre of Kurdish populations by Turkish army. And both of them were undoubtedly great authors, but there was also political signal. When the committee awarded Mario Vargas Llosa in 2010, of course, it gave the prize to a major writer, but also to a politically engaged man who supported in 1990 in his country the Liberal Party in Peru. Similarly, in 1953, Sir Winston Churchill was awarded, and this was surely a political choice and a political signal, but the committee said that this author used to write a very wonderful English.
You expressed well the political opinion on the Nobel Prize. Thank you for your word, Dr. Brun. This is the next question. When American pop singer Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016, many words were talked about in the world media. This is because he is a pop singer before he is a poet. Dr. Volko, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Bob Dylan's 2016 Nobel Prize in the Literature.
Bob Dylan received the Nobel Prize in 2016. The prize is the right hands. All his creative life he protested against the will of the regime. As a few artists only, he has influenced several generations around the world with his poetic songs. It is also the voice of my generation, and without I cannot imagine the inspiring 60s, which brought together especially young people without distinction in the East and in the West. Its strength lies in the connection of poetic text and excellent music. Many of his songs are still as relevant as his entire work. Bob Dylan is one of greatest musicians. Once more, Bob Dylan is one of the greatest musical, literary, cultural, in fact, social icons of the 20th and 21st century. The Swedish Academy of Science gave him the award for a new way of poetic expression, then followed with the great American songs tradition.
Thank you for your words, Volko. And next, Regula Venske from Germany. What do you think Bob Dylan Award as a musician? I want to hear your thought.
I'm all for Bob Dylan. I think he's an outstanding poet and modern-day prophet whose ballads possess a somewhat eternal quality, like a prophet from the Old Testament, really. He has been a source of inspiration for a whole generation and a source of both solace and encouragement for myself during almost all my life. I'm very grateful to this outstanding artist. I also think that Leonard Cohen was a fine poet who would have deserved the Nobel Prize as well.
Venske. And next, Dr. Brun. What do you think in this point?
This choice, like several other ones in the past, was clearly unexpected and quite controversial. Of course, the committee said that it has selected Raylan on the basis of the powerful originality of his creation. This prize can be supposed to reflect the tendency to consider that culture is not only literature but also popular song. And this makes sense. The committee says that Homer was the founder of the European culture, primarily released his poems only under the oral form, and they were written many centuries later. Of course, this is important, but it will be also important to still promote high standard literature and to avoid to consider that folk song has the same value as high standard literature, because literature can do much more than song. Of course, it can expand the area of human thought. It can help languages to deal with new concepts and new feelings.
Thank you for your words, Gordon. And next, Helmuth A. What do you think in this point?
Bob Dylan is undoubtedly a unique figure as a singer-songwriter. The developments of the time are reflected in his texts, but I never considered it worthy for a Nobel Prize. There are other awards for this genre, such as the Grammys, for example. There are enough writers who desperately need attention. A pop star is out of place on the Nobel Prize list, as politicians like Winston Churchill.
Thank you for your words. And next, dear Job. I know you are the musicians and writers. What do you think American pop singer Bob Dylan awards the Nobel Prize?
Bob Dylan's music has inspired me since I was a teenager, also because I sing and play guitar myself. However, with a few exceptions, his texts were not of such exceptionally high quality as to call for the Nobel Prize. I appreciate the totally unexpected choice from the Swedish Academy. A little storm can sometimes clear the air, but I still think the prize should stay purely literary, purely text, and not be diluted by combinations with other art disciplines. So no singer-songwriting, storytelling, spoken word, rap, drama, cabaret. Otherwise it will be very difficult to choose. There's a proverb in the Netherlands that says that you cannot compare apples with pears.
Thank you for your word, Job Degenaar. Bob Dylan is a singer who writes poems. Most of his songs are songs that sing the harmful epoch of war or claim human rights. He always sang during the past Martin Luther King's human rights rally, as well as other human rights campaigns. I think he became suspicious because he is an anti-war activist who called for human peace. is fit the purpose. The Nobel himself wants to be awarded to those who contributed to this aspect, because he sought the TNT he invented as buzzer epoch to human peace and preservation of the earth. It is my opinion. And next, Jean-Frederic Brun. I think the Nobel Prize for Literature is being awarded mainly in the West, where English, French, and Spanish are spoken. I think the literatures using non-mainstream languages is difficult to assess the Nobel Prize. What do you think on this point?
It is clear that 80% of the awardees are European, and that other continents such as Asia and Africa were barely considered during the first half century of Nobel Prizes history. Nobel academicians explained that they could not appreciate literature that was not translated into a language familiar to the referees. For example, this was the case for Iranian literature and for Arabic literature. Arabic literature was also said to refer most of the time to a very special context, and thus not to fit with the expectation of a universality of the Nobel Prize. Of course, it has been pointed out that Sweden appears to be overrepresented with twofold more awardees, 8 prizes, than the whole Asian continent, which had only 4 prizes. Even more, it took a long time for Africa to get its Nobels. Whereas Soyinka from Nigeria in 1986, Naguib Mahfouz from Egypt in 1988, Nadine Gordimer from South Africa in 1991, and Nkwezi from South Africa also in 2003. Probably things are changing over the recent years. More countries are represented, but most of the time, authors from those countries are writing in an international language, even if sometimes they use both that language and another less known one. For example, this is the case of Isaac Bashevis Singer in 1978, who wrote in English but also in Yiddish. And also Derek Walcott, who writes English and also Caribbean Creole.
Magda Carneci. I was invited to the Romanian Pan Literatures event a few years ago. At that time, I was surprised to know about that many Korean literatures was translated into Romanian. As far as I know, Romania has yet to produce the Nobel Prize winners like Korea. The Nobel Prize in Literature appears to be concentrated on English, French, and Spanish, the central languages of Europe. What do you think is a necessary point for the non-mainstream languages literatures to approach the Nobel Prize? I want to hear your opinions.
Less known literatures, like the Korean or the Romanian ones, but also many others, seem to be obsessed with the Nobel Prize if they don't have it already. It is a question of national pride to have at least one Nobel Award. Nevertheless, a Nobel Prize distinguishes, first of all, a gifted individual writer more than a collective national literature, even if an echo of the prize goes also to the national space of provenance of that writer. But it is not enough to have good writers in a national culture. It is vital, even capital, to have also good translators in many languages, and to have cultural mediators and institutions capable to promote actively these writers in mass media at a global scale. It is said that it takes at least 20 years to build an international literary fame around a writer for a Nobel Prize. I can tell you that in the last 20 years, many Korean authors have been translated into Romanian language thanks to the Literary Translations Institute of Korea. Alongside the K-drama movies and series, as well as the K-pop music, which are appreciated by the Romanian public, several Korean authors have been transposed into Romanian, such as, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, Anatoly Kim, Hwang Sok-young, Lee Moon-yeol, Park Wan-so, Yoon Dae-nyong, or Lee Song-woo. Several anthologies of Korean poets, fairy tales, short prose, and different novels can be also listed here. Recently, 4 novels were successful on the Romanian book market. Princess Barry by Hwang Sok-young, The Endless Empire by Yi In-hwa, Please Take Care of Mom by Kyung Sok-shin, and The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I can also tell you that nowadays there are excellent Romanian translators of Korean literature, such as Dan Brudashcu, Roxana Cătălina Angelescu, Liviu Groza, Carmen Patac, or Yolanda Prodan. I equally wish to name here 2 promoters of the Korean culture in Romania, Kim Yong-hwan and especially Tae Hyun-um, professor of Romanian language at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. For several years now, there is a Romanian prose writer and poet, Mircea Cartarescu, who is on the short list of the Nobel candidates. This year, Cartarescu was considered the candidate number 1. Nevertheless, on October 7, an unknown Tanzanian writer, Abdulrazak Gurnah, was announced as the Nobel Prize in Literature for 2021, probably for reasons partaking to political correctness. In this context, I remember that a great admirer of the Korean culture and literature, the French writer Jean-Marie Gustave Le Clésio, Nobel Prize in Literature 2008, has declared it is very possible that a future winner of the prestigious prize, Nobel Prize, be chosen from the contemporary Korean literature. And I trust him. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Carneci. And next, Regula Venske. The Nobel Prize for Literature is being awarded mainly to the Western. Literature using non-mainstream languages is difficult to assess the Nobel Prize. What do you think on this point?
You're absolutely right. And this is really a shame. Every year, I hope that the Korean poet Ko Un will be awarded the Nobel Prize at last. He would have well deserved it for years. After the scandals in the Swedish Academy some years ago, I had hoped for a signal of change when they restarted. But then they chose 2 writers from Central Europe again. In my opinion, Peter Handke was a wrong choice, even though he is a fine writer. I think countries and pen centers from other continents should lobby at the Swedish Academy and not get tired of sending them books and recommendations. One might also consider establishing an alternative Nobel Prize for Literature and announce this on the same date as the Nobel Prize. This would attract more attention to other parts of the world as well as other literatures. This year, though, I'm quite excited by the decision of the Swedish Academy. Abdulrazak Gurnah is not well known in Germany, and I'm looking forward to getting acquainted with his books myself.
Thank you for your word, Regula Venske. And next, Ladislav Volko. As you know, the Nobel Prize for Literature is being awarded mainly of the Western. I think literature using non-mainstream language is difficult to assess the Nobel Prize. What do you think on this point?
I think your claim the Nobel Prize for Literature is given primarily to the West is true. Just look at the names of the bearers and the country they came from. The first non-Western author to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature was Rabindranath Tagore, who became its holder in 1913. He wrote and translated from English, came from India, and at the time India was a British colony. Gabriela Mistral from Chile was the first from Latin America, 1945. In short, most of Nobel Prize bearers from non-West countries used to live from sometimes in Western countries or have had some strong liaisons, very often political, in West. Ivan Bunin, Boris Pasternak, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, etc.
Thank you for your words, Ladislav Volko. And next, Helmuth Niderleheremis. The Nobel Prize for Literature is being awarded mainly to the Western. What do you think? Literature using non-mainstream language is difficult to assess the Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize is given in Europe and has failed the much-cited globalization. Most probably, it doesn't change anything that Abdul Razak Gurna has now been honored. He writes English to be read as an author in the world. If he only wrote in his mother tongue, Kiswahili, and if he lived in Tanzania, he would hardly be known outside his homeland. What is needed are two things: a Nobel Prize jury that knows that 6,500 languages are used in this world, and that therefore a lot more research has to be done to find prize winners. In addition, prestigious literary prizes should be created in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, who would also be recognized internationally.
What do you think is necessary point for the non-mainstream languages literature to approach the Nobel Literature Prize?
The question is very close to the previous one. In order to be read in Europe, and especially in German-speaking countries, translations are required, good translations. This would have to be a national concern that is sustainably promoted. This includes the publication of books, reading trips by the translated authors, and all measures that promotes mutual understanding. Translators and editors need support to translate literature that are not mainstream but show the character of a culture to be discovered. At this point, I mean that the pen can do a lot. There should be an exchange that includes reciprocal visits so that the knowledge of the other side can be deepened.
Thank you for your words, Niderleheremis. And next, Job Degenaar. The Nobel Prize of Literature is being awarded mainly to the West. Literature using non-mainstream language is difficult to assess the Nobel Prize. What do you think on this point?
Literature in a non-mainstream language has had so far little or no chance for the Nobel Prize in Literature. Therefore, I would prefer a comparable prize for literature in non-mainstream languages. Given the opportunities and resources to do so, PEN would be an excellent organization to realize this because of the global nature of our Writers' Association and its ethical ideal of one humanity living in peace and equality in one world. Thank you for your attention. 감사해요.
You talk in Korean. Thank you. Thank you for your words, Job Degenaar. And next, Dr. Brun. I live in Europe, but use the non-mainstream Austrian languages. What do you think about this problem?
I can say that as a representative of a non-mainstream, even if it is a European one, language, as representative of a non-mainstream language, I can comment the story of our own Nobel, Frédéric Mistral, in 1904. The project of Frédéric Mistral was the revival of a language that has been famous in the Middle Age, but then over centuries was marginalized by French over its territory. And at that time, in the middle of the 19th century, there was something like a romantic dream at the time that other countries, the other cultures also were undergoing a revival. It was the birth of new nationalities all over the world. And Mistral has first the luck to be very early recognized as a great writer by the French poet Lamartine, who was a leader of opinion in that time in France and in the world. And Lamartine made Mistral become very early, very young, very popular. Another important point is that Mistral had a good friend that used to travel all over Europe and that knew many important people, who was the fascinating Irish-born Occitan poet William Bonaparte Wise. And although it is interesting to point out that William Bonaparte Wise was a Freemason. Giving to Mistral the Nobel Prize was his project. Translations of Mistral's major books in many languages were released. Most of the time, these translations are not very good. Some of them are quite poor, and they don't provide the possibility to appreciate the skill of Frédéric Mistral as the creator of a new culture. But Mistral has also been the author of a gigantic dictionary of Occitan language that provided the basis for the revival of this culture. And this point was clearly greatly appreciated by the referees. We can notice that the referees of the Nobel Prize had awarded 2 years before, in 1902, the German historicist Theodor Mommsen, who is the author of a monumental history of Rome. At that time, it's clear that such huge contribution to universal culture were very appreciated, even if they were not strictly literature, and that such works could deserve a Nobel. I think that our lucky opportunity as Occitans to write a Nobel Prize in a minority language was thus a result of course, of Mistral's extraordinary popularity, but also of the skillful lobbying of some friends and the acknowledgement that Mistral was the father of our literature. And perhaps there was also a political signals, because perhaps the committee wanted to challenge the feeling of superiority of French authors at that time, and awarding an author of France who was writing in another language than French was perhaps a signal to those people. Well, I don't know if this specific example can provide a recipe. Perhaps the lesson is that unexpected authors in a non-mainstream language, if they write good literature and if they open new areas, can be selected if there is also a need of a political signal that he or she can illustrate. Undoubtedly, of course, an important prerequisite would be to be translated into Swedish. That was the case of Frédéric Mistral, or at least now to English. Thank you.
Thank you for your word, Jean-Frederic Brun. So far, we have talked under the theme of Nobel Prize for Literature in various languages. Like Alfred Nobel's will to enact the Nobel Prize, those who contributed to the preservation of the earth and the human peace were the main winners. I think the Literature Award also should be seen in that category. I think the reason why literature winners have flowed to Europe, such as English, French, German, and other languages, is because of the ultimately of the language. The way non-mainstream languages literatures approach the Nobel Prize in Literature is also said to require another generous translation. Thank you for the debater and listener who participate in this discussion, even if you are busy. Let's wrap up this discussion. Thank you very much.